Hello, friends and fans of the podcast. Welcome to Movie Monday, where we be sharp and see the world of televised entertainment. It's interesting. Recently on one of my YouTube shorts, and I've been enjoying my YouTube shorts, I put the question, which decade of music was best? Let me stop. Which decade of movies was best and why? Now, it's not fair of me to sit here and mention in one episode all of the decades of movies because we just don't have enough time. Okay, here's the thing. I can start with the 50s, go to the 60s and 70s. You can spend a podcast series just on the 80s movies. You really could have episode after episode after episode of just 80s movies. And honestly, that podcast could run for years and you wouldn't run out of material. So what I'm going to do, because it's not fair of me to just rush through everything, today we will be spending time on the 1950s. And the reason why I decided to start here to start in the 1950s and not start in the 20s is because the 1950s is really kind of like the golden age of movies. Now, maybe you're a big fan of box office smash hits before the 50s, and there are a lot of people who are. It's a Wonderful Life from 46, Casablanca 42, Gone with the Wind 39, The Wizard of Oz 39, King Kong, 1933. The 40s, the 30s, they gave birth to actors like Humphrey Bogart, James Stewart, John Wayne, Clark Gable, Gary Cooper. Yeah, he started in 1923. So, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, I'm not going to say that those decades weren't big. They were, but something happened in the 50s. You can almost look at Hollywood and say Hollywood was a certain way in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And then the 50s came along, and then it was just like, bam, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then, of course, you have the 2000s, 2010s, 2020s, and I feel like we're okay. But, yeah, something happened in the 50s. So that's where we are going to start. But, of course, we need to hop on our time machine to go all the way back. Let me just hop in, shut the door, get this thing started up. Hold on. Okay, here we are now. Anyway, in the 20s, I just need to say that the term box office, because I said if you could be a box office fan from the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Yes, the expression box office is in fact from the 20s due to the box that people sold tickets in. Now, you're going to get some people that will say, well, hold on. The box office comes from the Elizabethan area to when people bought tickets to a play, and they would sit in that box. If you were rich, you would get those box seats, where you would sit down and be served caviar and wine and, have someone hold your cigarette for you while you puffed away at it and blew smoke O's into the air. But for all intents and purposes, the box office comes from the 1920s, where a dude sat in a box and sold you tickets to the movie, right? We're starting our series, our movie decade series, starting with the 50s. And it's a perfect time. It's really considered the television golden age. People like Bob Hope and other radio personalities moved their format. They had a radio format. They moved their radio or their radio shows from radio to television. By the end of 1952, a TV could be found in 20 million households throughout the United States, which was up 33% from 1951. So you can see where we're going here. We can see that this explosion was happening very clearly in the early 1950s. If you didn't have a TV, you were essentially an idiot. You had to have a TV back then, okay? There were people who decided, I'm just not going to feed my family this week, and then would get their TV. So for the first time ever, watching movies, debates, shows like I Love Lucy, and other things, they were becoming commonplace. And for all intents and purposes, the TVs in the 1950s was like social media, and how social media exploded in the mid-2000s. And the 50s gave birth to huge movie stars: James Dean, Marlon Brando, Marilyn Monroe, even though she technically started in 47, Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, Charlton Heston, Robert Shaw. The Sharks took the rest. The list continues, and it really won't stop. But why the 50s? Well, let's stop and think about it. Why is the 50s so big? Well, after World War II, as the TV began to become a fixture in the houses of America year after year, and as Hollywood made more and more movies outside of California, the budgets began to grow. So in essence, the 50s was the dawn of big budget cinema. Aubrey Hepburn, Gregory Peck in the 1953 movie Roman Holiday actually shot many scenes, guess where? In Rome. Filming in color and using wider panoramic shots was becoming commonplace in the 50s. And with other countries also getting into the movie gig, so now there was competition. The United States just couldn't make movies that looked substandard. How could they if China and other countries, who they're competing with, if they're going to make good movies? So competition was driving the industry into a technological revolution that it didn't even know it was ready for. But the results were magnificent. So, with movies costing millions of dollars to make, which adds up to hundreds of millions now if you use it $1958 to $2021, yeah. $10 million is essentially $180 million or whatever. But with movies costing millions to make, stars, yes, actors aware that their faces are going to be in every living room from coast to coast. People are going to be eating TV dinners looking at their face. There was an explosion of filming technology, and with just the right amount of competition, Hollywood had to say to itself, okay, this is the path we choose. We either die on this road or we pull over and give up. And they chose the former. Hollywood dove in wallet first, and they have not looked back since. Now, before I continue, I just need to mention some of the folks that contributed to this episode. No, I don't have any sponsors, but if you want to sponsor me, please send me your money and I'll say that people should buy your crap. But before I continue, here's the thing. It is important for me to mention some of the great feedback that we have had from the fans of the podcast. And I'm only on YouTube, baby. The only social media I'm using right now is YouTube, okay? And we've had some great feedback. YouTube user, and this is their username, Squidward is my spirit animal. When I asked what decade was the best for movies, this is what Squidward is my spirit animal said: the 1990s. And then they got specific. 1999, literally the best year for movies by itself, for sure. It would have been good to get maybe a couple examples of 1999 movies, and maybe you commented further in the thread, and I don't remember. But I'll have to go back, and now I'll have to research 1999 movies and see what's out there. But thank you, Squidward is my spirit animal. Sergeant V. Now, Sergeant V really took it to another level, okay? So I said, hey, what's the best decade for movies? And Sergeant V comes out and says the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010. So I'm like, so let me guess. Everything? My guess is that Sergeant V really likes movies. But here's something interesting. Sergeant V got, specific. Hotel Rwanda, Back to the Future. I mean, come on, Back to the Future. Mr. Holland's Opus. Now, I have not watched a movie starring Richard Dreyfuss in a long time. I think the last time I watched a movie that really starred him, not including Jaws, that I end up watching once every couple of months, I believe it was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I ended up watching a couple years ago, I think, and I just love. I love Richard Dreyfuss. And you know what's funny about Richard Dreyfuss? I was watching this interview recently about the movie What About Bob? You know, when you watch that movie, you think to yourself, wow, these two characters really hate each other. But guess what? In real life, they hated each other. Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss did not get along. They didn't get along with the director either. It was this quagmire of just, animosity, everyone towards the other person. Everyone wanted to stop filming and say, wait a second, we need to change the movie. It was a horrible experience for everyone involved. But it really did give birth to an excellent movie. So I thought that was funny, and that is something that they all just admit. All of them, the director, Richard Dreyfuss, Bill Murray, all of them in interview come right out and just say it. I mean, Richard Dreyfuss, he was actually downright insulting to Bill Murray, calling him a worthless piece of crap or something like that. It was really something. But yeah, anyways, I thought that was interesting. YouTube user Qualia, Qualia, says the 90s. Honestly, the list is too long. So here we have Squidward is my spirit animal and Qualia both saying that the 90s are like it. So now, when I get to the 90s, I'm going to need feedback from them. I'm going to need them to be like, okay, these are my favorite movies from the 90s. Could be Goodfellas. What was that, 1990? Right? But anyways, I asked the audience so I could get some feedback, seeing we are all different ages, different upbringings, different backgrounds. I love the feedback on YouTube, by the way, and definitely encourage y'all to please keep it coming. I honestly feed off of the feedback. I feed off of the feedback from the audience. I really do appreciate when they comment. Now, it's funny, Qualia said something interesting. Qualia asked me about war movies, which war movies I like. And I'm like, you know what? I have to dip into the sea. I love anything in a submarine. And a very close second is anything on a battleship or a destroyer. I happen to love the dialogue in ocean movies. I think if you're in a submarine movie or you're in an ocean movie, you're forced. The writers are forced to write good dialogue. You can't go anywhere. Physically, I mean. When you're in a submarine, it's not like you can walk down the street and go into the bakery and get something, and then you go to the movie theater, and then you're at dinner, and then you get in a car accident. And no, you're on a boat or you're in a submarine, and the dynamic, between the characters is something that needs to be brought out. Otherwise, the film's going to completely stink. So I feel like submarine movies and boat movies, anything naval, for me, I really enjoy. Those are the war movies that I would prefer to watch. But let's get back to the 50s, okay? By the end of 1953, almost every major Hollywood studio, almost everyone, I think everyone but one, was licensed to use Cinemascope Filming, which is that very, very widescreen type of filming that we see today. It's essentially the widescreen images we see in just about every movie today. Why is this so big? Because it's big. And it just feels right. It feels like we are there. It involves us more. It envelops us more. And it has become so natural that when we see something in like a 4:3 ratio, when we see film like that, almost a perfect square, we want to scream and walk away. It doesn't feel natural. But why do I mention all of these seemingly pointless things? Because the 50s is when Hollywood took a nosedive into itself and created films like Disney's Cinderella, Peter Pan, Ben-Hur, Rear Window, Around the World in 80 Days, which was a reboot of the first one, which I think was in the mid-20s, The Ten Commandments, Lady and the Tramp. Oh no, 20 Leagues Under the Sea, that was a reboot. There was one done in the 20s, and then they did another one in the 50s. Bridge on the River Kwai, Lady and the Tramp, Ten Commandments, and many more. Vertigo, yep. Though, Jimmy Stewart started acting much before the 50s, I feel like the 50s was just really nice to him. And then it shot him into the 60s as well. And in my opinion, some actors who started in the 40s but had a career through the 50s, I feel like during the 50s, they kind of crescendoed, or they just continued to grow until they exploded into the 60s. Kind of like, Spartacus with Kirk Douglas. He was acting through the 50s. And he was successful. But because Hollywood was exploding during the 50s, he kind of just went along for the ride. And then bam, Spartacus. And of course, the other 800 million movies that he made. Paul Newman, who was becoming big in the 50s, became a household name in the 60s and beyond. Why? Because it was almost like if you were an actor in the 50s, and you kind of just dug in and said, I'm riding this wave to the end. It was kind of like buying Intel stock just before it exploded. And if you were all in, if Intel was worth just a couple bucks or a couple cents, and you said, I'll put $20,000 on it, and you were all in when it exploded, yeah, you were in for a sweet ride. You now have 82 yachts. I feel like if Hollywood liked you, and you were all in as an actor, and you were making good movies in the 50s, and you were committed during the golden age, then you were catapulted into the 60s and beyond. That is what I feel. No, that doesn't mean that is only, the only catapult, because there were actors who started in the 30s and 40s who also had careers going into the 50s and 60s and what have you. I mean, a good example would be Jimmy Stewart. He was, if I'm not mistaken, he was acting since the mid 30s, and he had a career in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and then of course he stayed with it and went into the 60s. But there was something about the 50s. It was the golden age, and you were catapulted into the 60s and beyond. And that catapult, yes, the spring sprung in the early 50s and exploded as that decade came to a close. Now, here's the thing. I could just keep on going about the 50s. And every decade also has its political, lefts and rights, and political correctness, lefts and rights. Oh, well, sex was never mentioned in a certain period, but then, of course, I mean, now you can't even watch, a television commercial without sex being thrown in our faces. But I mean, there was a period when you could use a certain word to refer to a certain racial group, or you could use a certain, expression to refer to something. And then all of a sudden political correctness came, and then that went away. And then, I watched, and, a great director, if you want to, and if you like his movies or not, this is immaterial. I'm not talking about what kind of movies he makes, although I find this director, Quentin Tarantino, I don't go out of my way to watch his movies. I actually am not, I don't look at IMDb. When's the next Quentin Tarantino movie coming out? But here's what I like about him. Number one, he studies his craft. I know that sounds stupid. It sounds obvious. Like everyone should study their craft. If you are working in the automobile industry, you've got to study automobiles. He understands the history of Hollywood, the history of movies. He absolutely hates relying on CGI. I'm trying to think of moments where CGI was used in one of his movies. I can't think of any, to be honest with you. I can't think of any. So he does not want to rely on CGI. He actually does not like it. He really likes the organic nature of television. He likes where it came from. He understands where it came from, like really, really well. And he loves to have conversations about it, as long as you respect him. I've seen people get on his case about the violence in his movies, and it's like, listen, if you have a hidden agenda, I find Quentin Tarantino to actually be pretty intelligent. So if you interview him or talk to him and have some type of hidden agenda, I think he's going to expose you for it or just shut down the conversation. But I have noticed that he's very tactile, and his directing style is so. I mean, it's almost more organic than what it was back in the 50s and 60s, because back then, believe it or not, directors and production studios, everyone, especially in the 50s, everyone was looking for the new and up and coming technology to help them with filming. Oh, look, you can film in this type of color. You can Technicolor, for example. Like in the 30s, it started to really come into the movies, like The Wizard of Oz and other movies. Technicolor became big, and throughout the 40s and 50s, especially the 50s, this technology, everyone was looking for that edge. And Quentin Tarantino, see, the reason why I believe he's more organic than people back in the 50s is because in the 50s, even though it was extremely organic, people were looking for ways to kind of boost the image. Quentin Tarantino is living in a quagmire of technology, and looking for ways to actually devolve the technological evolution of filming and say, no, I don't want to do it that way. If we do it that way, it's going to look fake. And I mean, I saw some scenes. I was just flipping through the TV once, and I saw a 5-minute scene with Brad Pitt. And I think it was on the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I actually haven't seen. I just was flipping through the station, and I caught a 30-second, you flipping through, it's on. It took me less than 30 seconds to look at the way this was filmed and say to myself, what, huh? It was so insanely organic. There was no music. The conversation was slow. So like Brad Pitt would say something and the camera would move, but like it wouldn't even really show who Brad Pitt was talking to. And there was silence. So you had to guess who the heck's he talking to? The heck's going on? And then you realized after 30 seconds, you're more engaged in this movie, and all you heard was one sentence. You're more engaged in that than when you're flipping through the stations and buildings are falling down, transformers are throwing cars across the street. I wish this organic way of filmmaking took over all of the entertainment industry, because after all, it's the people who are entertaining us, not the doodads and gadgets that they're making, but it's the people who are entertaining us. It's Quentin Tarantino and his brain. It's Brad Pitt and his acting and his talent. That's what it is. And I believe in the 1950s, even though I'm sounding a little bit contradictory, and if you think I'm contradicting myself, you can trash me in the comments. That's totally fine. I get it. But the 1950s was very organic, but it was, for the most part, everyone was looking for that new technology. And you know what? If Quentin Tarantino was making movies in the 50s, I'm sure he would have also, with the way he thinks, been looking to the future. Wow, what other technologies can we have? But now the market is saturated with technologies. And I'm not saying he doesn't use technology. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is he wants the viewer to actually relate organically, emotionally, psychologically, even if it's the basest aspect of psychological humanity or human psychology, because some of his movies really do that. They bring out the ugly side of people. Even though that might be the case, he's still making an effort to say, I want to reach the mind of my viewer. And that's really nice. Now, the 1950s was almost all that. It really was. It was good acting, big budget. It was on location, people flying to Spain, people flying to Rome, people leaving Hollywood to make movies. The Technicolor came in, the new widescreen came in. A lot of that came in the 50s. Now, of course, and I'm not going to get into it much right now, but I will as I go on to the 60s, 70s, and 80s. 60s and 70s were great. The 80s, I think, is when Hollywood said, we can do a lot. We can write a good story, but do a lot with technology. We can create fake creatures. We can create, and we can make things that are fake look real. It wasn't, I can remember, growing up in Boston and my stepdad watching TV, and I'm like, Dad, what are you watching? Oh, I'm watching Star Trek. And you see Captain Kirk landed on some distant planet, and he's trying to save somebody, and a boulder, and I'm talking like 3 feet in diameter. If this thing landed on you, it would crush your face. You would die instantly. But, there's an earthquake on this weird planet out in the middle of nowhere, and this 3-foot diameter boulder comes rolling down this mountain and bounces off Captain Kirk's face. And he falls to the ground, and he's like, oh, God, where am I? I think I was knocked unconscious. You'd be dead, right? But that's what bothered me. The writing was good. I did not like how fake the effects were. And then in the 80s, they basically said, hey, we don't need to do that. We can make effects actually look real, and they took it to that level. And they did that with Predator. They did that with Aliens, And of course, when did Jaws come out? 75? Jaws was amazing. Jaws was amazing. I actually don't think that movie could ever have a reboot. I don't see how they could do it. I don't see how you could do it. Jaws was so good. I want to take my TV and bang it over my knee, crack it in half when I see Jaws 2. Jaws 2 is like this horrible insult compared to Jaws 1. Jaws 3, what the heck was that? It was almost like Hollywood was saying, hey, look at this 6-pack on this actor. Who was it? It was, who was the actor? I'm going to go nuts here. He was in DOA. He was in The Day After Tomorrow. What the heck? I can't think of his name. Do I have to Google it now? Hold on. I am Googling the actor. Hold on. God, if I could type, that would be great. Jaws 3. Dennis Quaid. Oh, yeah, I swear to you, when Jaws 3 came out, it was Hollywood saying, hey, let's get the girls on board. Jaws 1 was like all these guys who wanted to like watch people get eaten by a shark. But, let's get Dennis Quaid to like have his shirt off half the movie and just flex his abs. Just flex your abs. And then they had Louis Gossett Jr. Oh, man, I miss him. Man, Iron Eagle. Anyways, yeah, sorry, but Jaws 1, that was 75. And yeah, I mean, they had a mechanical shark. I think it was the first film of the ocean ever shot completely on the ocean over down at Martha's Vineyard. I could be wrong about that. I'll have to double check. But yeah, 1975. So that decade is coming. But anyways, the 50s, the golden age of TV, all the crap happened. It was like this culmination of all these things happening at once that just all of a sudden, and in the American, let's just face it. Think about, now I know, and I don't want to become like Mr. Historian on you, but the 20s and 30s, right? You had jazz becoming popular in the New Orleans, the Chicago scene, right? Jazz was popular. What did you have? I believe it was 1920 to 1933. You couldn't buy a beer without getting arrested, right? Because of stinking prohibition. So for 13 years, although Hollywood was really getting its start, you couldn't enjoy a glass of wine while you were watching a movie. And then just, 1933? Stop and think about it. The stock market essentially crashed right when beer became legal again. And then, of course, you had World War II starting in 1939. So you had Prohibition, the stock market crash, the Great Depression, World War II. And when that ended in 1945, people were like, yeah, life sucks. I don't want to live. And bam, late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s, movies were an escape. You didn't have to look at your crappy life. You had a little box in your living room. People stopped eating dinner in their kitchen. And they're like, let's watch TV now. Yep. The 1950s. It's when Hollywood became America's pacifier. The world's pacifier. Well, I shouldn't say that. There are a lot of countries in this world who really don't give a flying hoot about American movies. And I do have to separate American movies from other countries. Because, I lived in Brazil for 2 years. Do you know how many Brazilians actually enjoy Brazilian movies? Like 0.0004% of them. They're like American movies. We're the only country who says, you know what, let's make a movie for people to watch. Hey, anyone get an extra $300 million? We're the only country doing that. So that it ends up being a gigantic production because we spend all this money. That's why movies that are made, my wife always says to me, I can't stand movies made in Britain. And it's because they're not going to spend $500 billion on effects. So what ends up happening is that there's a lot of dialogue. And then even sometimes there are chase scenes. You can be, you got caught by the police. And the police and the mafia are running after you, and you hop in your car and you drive away, and then someone hops on a motorcycle to chase after you, and they're firing a gun, and all this is happening with no background music. It's people breathing, as that's all you hear, and it's like, where the heck's the music? It's very different. The amount of money that the United States puts into producing a box office hit is insane, and I'm not just talking effects. I'm talking movie scores, I'm talking actors, just absolutely everything. And hey, you know what? That's why American movies are popular in other parts of the world, but it's popular in other parts of the world that wants to watch American movies. There are plenty of other parts of the world that aren't as interested. But that being said, now I'm beginning to ramble. It's been a half hour. I'm cutting this puppy short. Actually, it's not. I'm not cutting it short. I'm just ending it. This episode is officially over. Well, hold on. Is it over? I have some notes. I think I have like a goodbye thing I want to say. Let me read my notes. Thank you for listening. All right. That's what I had written down. Okay, so now the episode is over. All right. I'm going to put this on YouTube. Comment. Please give me feedback, because if I don't have feedback, I don't know how to change the podcast so that I can be more annoying to my listeners. And again, this is Artie Astor from the podcast Be Sharp and See. Until next time, keep it groovy.